I've been meaning to make another sultai video for a while now about some bad deck building traps I've seen people fall into. Commander Mechanic's recent video exemplifies these traps as he discusses Cotus the Fang Keeper, a commander that will undoubtedly become immensely popular due to its repeatable villainous wealth effect. I won't be doing a play-by-play reaction to the various points in his video on which I disagree, but I will summarize his points here. One being that Mutate is an effective way to support Cotus by optimizing his combat trigger. Two being that Mutate is also effective at making non-legendary copies of Cotus to get even more out of his ability. And three being that Brokkos is a good pivot to run as the commander with Infect effects and small unblockable creatures. Here are a few things we need to consider with Cotus. 1. Cotus is a Goldilocks commander that needs conditions to be just right to shine. The combat trigger ability suggests itself towards a pump build in which you want to make him as big as possible, yet making him too big will knock your opponent out of the game before his villainous wealth trigger can resolve. In a format where your opponents are committing resources to win, the Cotus player is committing just as many, if not more resources to deal big blows that still leave the defending player alive. I think Cotus wants to stay at a sweet spot between 4 and 7 power in most scenarios, unless you were going in for the final attack. 2. In a format famous for 4-player free-for-alls, in which most players play decks that attempt to defeat all of their opponents at once, Cotus's deck building revolves entirely around attacking one opponent. Building around his combat damage trigger, therefore, is already an uphill battle in a format that finds such strategies egregious and insufficient. 3. It is unlikely you will get away with a small bean ploy, the strategy to build goodwill at the table by appearing weak, since Sultai and Cotus are so inherently aggressively value heavy. Just having a combat damage trigger in the command zone will make the table permanently revoke your small bean card. With those things in mind, I can finally jump into addressing Commander Mechanic's video. Let's start by getting one of Commander Mechanic's smaller points out of the way, when he suggests Infect during the pivot section of the video. I like to set the record straight on Infect, and I imagine I'll have to revisit this point several times in the future if I make more deck building videos. We'll go through this one trap by trap. Infect's first trap, Weak Theme. Infect is bad in competitive EDH, and it is grossly overrated in casual EDH. In other words, it has no home outside of a Vorthos-style flavor-first deck. You are either spending a lot of mana and cards getting one thing to deal 10 damage 3 times, or trying to get a lot of small things to deal 10 damage to each opponent, or playing a lot of cards to slowly proliferate counters on opponents. There's just nothing efficient or expedient about this. Infect's second trap, Passing the Vibe Test. Infect is divisive. Many inexperienced players hate Infect on principle, and will even hold it personally against the Infect player for even considering running it. It's in my opinion one of the greatest ironies of playing this game is that Infect doesn't win in Commander nearly enough to warrant these opinions. Infect players in such company rarely win since they are so frequently hard targeted. It doesn't matter how wrong a player is for believing Infect is unfair or overpowered. It only matters to them that Infect is mean and needs to go away. I would personally not bring Infect to a table knowing that this happens so often, and I especially prefer free-for-all games and not these 3 people against me games that Infect tends to bring out. Mutate. Mutate's first trap, Bad Cards. The numbers on EDH Rec show that folks playing Sultai Mutate like to play a whole mess of 1 or 2 drop creatures with either Evasion or Infect. These cards are really, really bad by themselves without mutating them. They need a lot of support, and they do not help each other. In other words, in a Mutate deck, if the whole Mutate plan isn't working out, there's rarely ever any decent backup. Mutate's second trap, a lack of resilience. Although this may just specifically apply to Cotus. Cotus is indestructible. Because he's indestructible, it is highly unlikely that your opponent's removal will result in him going to the graveyard. This means his indestructibility will actually work against you in a Mutate theme, since more often than not, Cotus will leave the battlefield via exile effects, Swords to Plowshares, Farewell, and any of your attached Mutate cards will go to the command zone with him. As we all know, Sultai is really good at recursion effects, so playing Mutate seems to be a means to purposely forego one of Sultai's strengths as a color identity. Mutate's third trap, bad rates. You are paying 4, 5, 6 mana, maybe even more, to give Cotus anywhere from +2 to +4 power, albeit sometimes with flying or trample. However, this bad rate, combined with the aforementioned weaknesses, make Mutate an extremely unattractive prospect, even in budget deck building. The rates get worse when you are trying to mutate him for the purpose of cloning him, as the card and mana investment shoots through the roof for low returns. Paying an average of 5 mana to mutate a 4 mana creature, then paying another 4 mana to clone him and waiting a turn for the clone to attack doesn't add up to a winning game plan. You are going to be frequently disrupted by the other 3 opponents every step of the way in trying to make this Rube Goldberg machine work. If you want to run Brokkos as the commander, play a self-mill theme with Lurgoyf-style creatures. Cruel Somnophage, Splinterfright, Urborg Lurgoyf, and White of the Reliquary are big bodies for cheap in a self-mill deck. It's an easy task to get any of these creatures to 21 power or higher since they check for the total number of creatures in your graveyard. Then, you can mutate them with Brokkos to take advantage of the fact that the merged object will still count as your commander whether Brokkos is on the top or bottom of the pile. Gerard is a great backup win con to close out the game too if Brokkos isn't doing the trick, as his life loss ability hits all of your opponents. Here are some alternative themes you can try running for Cotus. If you want to go all in on a singular Cotus, which I only advise you do at lower bracket tables since the deck won't function well whenever he isn't in play, you can run a mana-efficient Spellslinger theme with lots of draw, cantrips, interaction, and a few equipment pieces. There are many 1-mana instants and sorceries that will grant Cotus evasion and draw you a card: Cloak of Feathers, Leap, Enter the Enigma, and Shadow Rift. Equipment such as Glamdring, Leering Emblem, and Runechanter's Pike fit well into the Spellslinger theme and are bolstered by your cantrips. Thanks to his combat damage trigger, you can treat pump effects for Cotus as if they were draw cards. Might of Old Krosa, Invigorate, and Might of the Nephilim all provide huge buffs at the lowest possible costs. If you want to go wide with a multitude of Cotus copies, run the clone effects that already bypass the legendary issue: Irenicus's Vile Duplication, Vesuvan Diplomancy, Auton Soldier, Quantum Misalignment, Spark Double, and both Sakashimas. Mutate is an unnecessary extra step to run this game plan. You can instead run cards which modify the base power and toughness of your board, such as March of the World Ooze and Tanazir Quandrix. I also suggest +1/+1 counter buffs, such as Master Biomancer and Arwen Weaver of Hope. Consistently providing your whole board with evasion will be tricky, but you can use cards like Cover of Darkness and Geralf Visionary Stitcher. If you want a deck which operates well regardless of whether Cotus is out, but can still support him, I suggest playing Zombie Kindred. Zombies can provide plenty of Anthem effects to pump your board, such as Diregraph Captain, Cemetery Reaper, Death Baron, and Undead War Chief if you're willing to splurge on a great support piece. Zombies also have several support cards to bring Cotus back in the rare event he hits your graveyard, such as Lord of the Undead, Zol Asher Lichlord, Unholy Grotto, and Gisa and Geralf. The evasion cards like Cover of Darkness and Geralf work for this deck just as well, but you can also run Lord of the Accursed and Graph Harvest to grant your board menace. Zombies have been a strong theme for a long time, and they continue to do well, and just putting Cotus at the helm of such a deck will yield good results, even if you can only have Cotus's effect go off like once or twice a game. And one final theme I can suggest for Cotus is Graveyard. Similar to my Brokkos deck, which revolves around Lurgoyf-style creatures, playing a self-mill deck allows you to run great creatures to cheat out with reanimate effects, while setting up cost-effective pumps for Cotus like Ghoul's Feast, Grave Strength, Night Howler, and Bone Horde. And by milling yourself, you can set up evasion at practically no cost with Brawn and Wonder. If you can afford a copy of Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, then you'll also benefit from running Filth as well, which gives your entire board Swamp Walk. That just about wraps up everything I wanted to say about Cotus. Building a sultai deck isn't always straightforward, and while many themes will appear mechanically sound on paper or a screen, they don't always translate to results. I anticipate at least a few folks watching this video to perceive my sentiments as those of a power gamer or a min-maxer, but I'm as casual as they come. But I also believe that a deck should, above all else, be functional. Building bad decks or building weak themes in, color identities that don't necessarily complement them, even if you have no intention of frequently winning, still often lead to very unfun games, in which you're sitting around the table able to do nothing, twiddling your thumbs, while you watch the rest of the table draw a play and have fun. Playing Infect will draw undeserved ire over a deck that won't even be that strong, and Mutate really needs a lot more than what Sultai colors can give.